mean, all of us here who are writers know what that means. And readers can kind of understand what we're saying, because I just finished writing a book and I know my energy was like this by the end of it. I was so inward that when I met people after that, it took me a while to begin to connect. So like I said, writing is lonely business. So in December 2021, we got together and created the Writers Collective in Bangalore. We're all part of a very old institution, old social institution, distinguished institution, and none of us knew each other till we created the Writers Collective and we came together with the pure intent of improving the craft of writing. And through workshop, through a whole bunch of exercise, we were like madmen obsessed with becoming better writers, till one of us in the group says, let's write a book together. And what resulted is this book called Relationship Ragas, an anthology of short stories. And by the time we had finished writing the book, we realized that the process of writing and producing the book was a story in itself. So when the conversation started with Shubha about us coming here, she says, "What are you going to talk about?" I said, "We are going to talk about the making of the book." And we had no idea that what started off as a fun idea by a group of writers, actually, when the book came out in Amazon, very quickly it went on to bestseller of this, hot new release. We were as shocked as anybody else. And the reason we're here is to tell you this story about how that happened. It's a human experience because there are 23 of us who came together to make this happen. And I can't even begin the session without introducing the 23 people on video. Our writers come from diverse backgrounds. We have published authors, we have award-winning writers. We have one Saturday Academy Award winner. We have first-time writers who've never written a short story before. Our objective is to ensure that every story comes up to a level where it is publishable, and today it's even being bought. I mean, there are hardly any copies left. We are surprised. We never imagined it would happen this way. What I think really worked was the collaboration, and this is the story of that collaboration. People on stage for obvious reasons. But the core group, the group that actually made it happen, including Shiv, but Shiv got his time in the sun in the previous panel, so we said just sit there and clap for us. He was also a part of the core group that made this happen. So we're here to tell you the story. We don't have much time, so I'm really going to go into it. Starting with Kalyan, my first question is to Kalyan. Just hang on to the mic, Kalyan.
Hello.
He's the Bhishma Pitamaha of our group. He's from IIT Madras and from IIM Calcutta, a serial entrepreneur and a writer of considerable repute. His exquisite book, The Songs of the Kaveri, a historical novel set in the 19th century, was adjudged the best debut novel in 2016 and was longlisted and shortlisted for several other prizes. He writes very, very beautifully. Okay, just hold up your book, Kalyan. So my question to you, Kalyan, is tell us about the cover of the book. What is the origin of the name, Relationship Ragas, and why does this design here make me think of this Japanese art of kintsugi? You know, where they take molten gold and they weld together the breaks in porcelain so that the final product looks even more beautiful than the original product. Tell us how this connects to the book and your experience.
As you can see, can you hear me? Yes. As you can see, the title of the book is Relationship Ragas, and if you notice, you should notice these gold streaks running through it. And in fact, if you see the book, you will wonder whether they are actual gold. Mm-hmm. Now, because Rugmani talked about the Japanese art of kintsugi. Now, relationships are fragile. They break easily. They crack easily, and very often they needed to be mended with the gold of empathy, the gold of care, the gold of love. So this is something that's evident in all the stories. Either that mending is successful or not is a different matter, but that is evident in all the stories. Now, the basic idea is to have the so-called imperfections shown, and that's a beauty by itself. So you have two different kinds of people, for instance, and how do you show a relationship between them? Not by painting them over in a single color, but by showing the kind of relationship between them in a beautiful manner. So that is what it does. I mean, you will see that there are these stories which have, I'll give you an example. Would you say that the dereliction of duty by an officer could constitute empathy? I'm looking at Murti now. Would you say, for instance, that a painting could invoke fear? Another could invoke love and affection? Could you really imagine any of these things? Yes, you could. So these are these imperfections which are papered over, not quite papered over, but shown separately in their pristine beauty through this work. Now, in the title, both the title and the cover itself is relevant in even more ways. one of the things that we did as editors is we looked at the stories of, when we looked at the stories of various authors, they were beautiful, they were sure enough there were imperfections. But one of the things that we needed to do was make sure that those imperfections were not really imperfections, but they represented a unique voice and style of the author. So we needed to preserve those. So rather than dipping the whole porcelain cup into a vat of gold, we were able to add streaks of gold in order to present a uniform, nice looking porcelain cup. Anyway, with regard to editing, I think Pratima will be able to say more about it. Don't you think, Rugmani?
In the meantime, we worked as a team. This group here worked as a team. How do you put the final objective of a book above our individual preferences, choices, and any agenda that we had? That was what happened. When we had a conversation about this later, we asked, did our horoscopes match at this time? We found that we worked so much in unison and so much with understanding and empathy and sensitivity to each other that what resulted was eventually this book. Now Raj, I'm going to introduce Raj here. Raj graduated from IIT Bombay as a telecom and tech professional. In 2012, he authored a prophetic sci-fi thriller about a state-sponsored surveillance, remote neural monitoring, and civil rights violation. The book, called Devil's Ether, was published 6 months before and had striking resemblance to the actual expose in the Edward Snowden case, where US intelligence agencies were found snooping on its citizens. But that is not my question, though I think that deserves another session in itself. My question to Raj is that when you wrote your first book, you wrote completely on your own. This time you worked in a collective. What advantage, what benefit did you see in being a part of the collective?
Thank you, Rugmani. Yeah, so I did write a book about 10 years back, a high-tech political thriller. In case you're wondering, yes, that is a genre. And the advantage of writing in such a narrow niche is you get to be number one on Amazon in a very narrow niche. For example, I was number one in high-tech political thrillers written by 60 years old, living in Bangalore, pin code 56004. Yeah. So yeah, that was my genre, high-tech political thriller. And why did I do it in isolation is because I had a day job then. And when I set out to write, I did approach my writer friends, people from school and college who had written before me and published and moderately successful, thinking that being friends, they would share their personal insights with me, yeah, about their journey and give me tips. But I just found them, my friends, better friends, found them to be a little sort of insecure. Maybe it was that, maybe it was something else. So I got absolutely no pointers from them, except that, okay, look up this site, read that book, which I could have gotten from anyone or anywhere. So that actually put me off, and I just stopped approaching other writers for tips. I said, okay, I'm going to do it on my own. And I did it. It was fulfilling, yes, in terms of the journey, because I'm a do-it-yourself guy, and I did a lot on my own. I enjoyed it, but I think the product could have been a better version of the product had I some guidance from my friends or other writers, which was lacking. Then I wouldn't blame the writers community. It could have been just me and my friends, and I just stopped after that. Yeah. Now, cut to 2021 and the formation of the collective, and I got associated with it. And I didn't write after my first book, and I wrote again now because of the collective. Yeah? And here, of course, in stark contrast to those guys then, this collective and the core team, most of them who are here, yeah, their only objective, like Rugmani did mention earlier, was to get people to write. Not just the young guys, but new writers, people who have written and stopped writing like me, draw them out, get them to write, be there for them, yeah? Like no writer gets left behind. If my earlier journey was a solo trek, this was a group trek, and people looking back to say that no one's trailing, yeah? So that was the difference in the journeys. Now, if you want to talk about, okay, the commitment, I think we should be talking about the elaborate process that was set up, yeah, to sort of get people to write. Starting from the workshops that Rugmani mentioned in terms of the experienced and published authors, uh, teaching the craft to the new writers. So that's the workshops. And then once the anthology was announced, getting people to actually write short stories. And then from then onwards, the editing process. Of course, various rounds with a buddy system where some of us mentored the others, peer reviews where the 23 authors reviewed 22 other stories on 6 criteria like character, pace, grammar, language, and so on. So that did generate a number of data points, around 3,500 data points to be collated, compiled, and then given to the authors. It was a peer review, so it was more acceptable. Yeah. So the relationship within the group is a writer-writer relationship. It's not a publisher-writer or a editor-writer. Yeah. So I think that was the beauty of the thing, and the other editing rounds like the MFA writing review workshops that I think one of them will talk about later. So I think the commitment can be seen through the elaborate process and the way the core team took the rest of the writers along.
Raj, that takes us actually to my next question to Murali. Murali is also IIT Bombay, IIM Calcutta. He has a doctorate from NIAS Bangalore. His first novel, Supersonic, published in 2021, is a thriller covering espionage technology set in a historical context. So my question to Murali is a question that all us writers have. What does the audience want? How do you imagine who you're writing for? What are they thinking while you're writing something that's you're so convinced about in your head? Is that what your reader is looking to read? So my question to you is, what was it that we did for every writer to get a real reader experience, to help them lift the quality of their stories?
Yeah. So thank you for that question, Rugmani. Let's take a look at what was the status, in a sense, at the end of August 2022. We had a total of 23. In fact, there were a total of 25 stories because there were a couple of authors who had actually submitted more than one. And everybody had read everybody else's story. And each author, of course, in his or her own self-indulgent kind of way, had their own opinions about each one of the stories that they had written. But we were still stuck with the question of what would be the response from all of you out there who had not participated in this exercise, who had no idea. As far as you were concerned, this was going to be just another book in one of the other 1 million odd books which are launched every year on Amazon. How do we make ourselves different? Which meant really that we had to find a way to lift the level of our stories from good to great, let's say. So we racked our brains about it, and then we hit upon an idea which had been taught in a couple of Master of Fine Arts courses that we heard about in the US. And it was this, that suppose our 23 writers, because the entire book was a DIY exercise, suppose we stopped being writers and started becoming readers. Let's have a conversation between two readers, careful readers. Now, I'll explain exactly what I mean by a careful reader. A careful reader is a person who goes through a story, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, and reflects upon it to decide just one thing. Does this work for me, or does this not work for me? Does this paragraph work for me? Does this line work for me? And can I explain it in a conversation? So that's exactly what we did. We organized teams of two careful readers drawn from each from each one of us. So we had a total of 46 readers for 23 stories, and each session would take about an hour and a half. And the structure was that the author would sit silent. The author was not supposed to participate at all in the exercise, and it would be a conversation between those two people about what worked, what didn't work, and in the process, if there were any insights that could be gotten. So when we started it, in fact, I think I was the first to review along with you. we found that this was a strange thing which was happening. We completely forgot about the writer, and we completely forgot about all the other observers and so on. We were just totally involved in the story and the conversation. And we found ourselves getting very spontaneous. We had a big argument, I remember, about one particular part of the story. And I, of course, as time went by, I also indulged in a little bit of theatrics. If I found that there was something shocking, I would say, oh my God, is it time to clutch my pearls? And so on, stuff like that, right? But this effort of a total of 23 workshops for 23, it was a massive logistical exercise, and we managed to organize it over Zoom. On the average, it was about once or twice a week. So over a period of 2 weeks, 2 months, by the end of November or so, we had a lot of feedback about how an audience would respond to each one of the stories. And not just that, because we had recorded each one of these workshops, we also had an idea of how many different kinds of audiences, how many different kinds of readers there were. And I think at the end, I think that was something which all our writers appreciated. And I think it's time now to actually speak to one of the writers and ask him.
Right, you can hold on to that. Siddharth, you were the guinea pig.
Yes, I was.
Siddharth wasn't in the co-group, okay? Siddharth never makes anything on time. He almost didn't make it to the anthology because, he almost didn't make it to the anthology because he submitted his story 1 minute past midnight. But when he had the stories judged by external evaluators, they said his was one of the best stories. So we said we'll allow him on stage to tell us how traumatized he was by this experience of what we did to him. He is a specialist in writing, design, and broadcast communication. That's your background.
Yeah, so with respect to the experience of writing for the first time short story writer, and for the first time being part of a collective of people writing together, it was very novel for me. I remember thinking in the beginning, how are these guys going to get 23 writers to work together? And I realized I couldn't figure out the solution. But I was like, it's okay. Somebody's floated the idea. They must have an idea of how they want to run this. So like, it's their problem. Let them figure it out. I'll be selfish and I'll figure out my story. And I started operating from that space, which was being a selfish writer. Now, in my day job, I'm a copywriter. So I write for a living, but I've never written for myself personally. I end up writing for an entity or for a brand or something. So there's always an intention, there's always a cell that's attached to everything that I was doing. So in approaching this selfishly, it was the first time that I could actually write for the sake of writing, which was extremely freeing. And I think that was one of the things that being a part of a collective gave me. It was that I could focus on the writing and nothing else. So when I started operating from that space, I noticed something else that was really interesting that happened, which was I was suddenly more aware of the writing. Let me try and explain that. I forgot about trying to show up as a good writer, and I wanted the story to be the best version of itself. And that was another very freeing experience because it automatically made me a lot more open and receptive to change and feedback. Now, writers, artists, creative people, maybe people in general, don't do so well with criticism. I know I don't. But through this process of being able to dissociate from everything else, I was able to focus on the writing, and it made me more receptive to all the many points of feedback that came through in talks with buddies, workshops, peer reviews, and so that was the only aim. Write the best version of this story and make this story the best that it can be. And so again, that's a function of being a part of a collective. Now, not everything was hunky-dory. As Rugmani said, deadlines were my arch nemesis, and these were deadlines that were agreed upon as a group. There's this quote by Douglas Adams where he says, I love deadlines. I love the sound they make as they go whooshing by. And I don't like deadlines. In fact, it's giving me anxiety just thinking about it right now. So I did everything in my part to sort of make sure that I could hit those deadlines, and I failed every single time. But even in the end, when it was time to deliver my final version of the story, I had some guardian angels from the core team who came through and said, don't worry about the best, don't worry about perfection, just put it together, send out something. And I think that was the main experience the main learning that I take from this entire experience, which was to pursue progress over perfection. Now, I know that I trip myself up when I start thinking of an idea, because from the get-go I want it to be the best thing. It needs to be perfect. But what I've learned in working with these group of people here is that you got to make the first step. Make the first step, and then we'll figure it out along the way. I know the core team themselves must have at some point, they must have started out with a plan, but would have very quickly had to change directions depending on the changing circumstances. So, that was the takeaway for me. Progress over perfection. And I'd like to thank all of them for making a bunch of us from writers to now authors. Thanks.
That's sweet. One of his guardian angels was Pratima. And Pratima is an award-winning educationist and author of several mathematics books published by Macmillan. Her right brain works as well as her left brain because she's a fantastic writer and an excellent editor. My question to Pratima is this is a question I ask all editors. How much editing is too much editing? How little editing is too little editing? It's very difficult being an editor because you want to hold on to the voice of the author, and yet you want to make the story the best version of itself. Over to you, Pratima.
So I went as far as I needed to go to make each story shine. I'm a teacher. I want the best out of all my pupils, right? So, did I tell them, put more fire into your writing, else I will put your writing into the fire? No, far from it. I felt like a ballerina tiptoeing in a minefield of author sensitivities. Someone said that editing is like untangling the hair of someone you love. It's painful, but it has to be done. And I think I did all of that. I think it's Dr. Seuss who says, the writer who breeds more words than he needs makes it a chore for the reader who reads. So I had to really cut down a lot of it. I had to climb into every story with the author. I had to guide the plot, embellish the characters, and sometimes I demolish the characters. Like there's an unnecessary dog, a fly which just comes in, does not add to the arc of the story or the character's arc. But here's the thing, 23 different styles. I had to keep the authors and their characters' voices internally consistent, maintain their style. So I couldn't put all 23 stories into one template and throw one rule book at it. That was quite a challenge. Now, gone are the days when editing is only about grammar and punctuation. We have Grammarly, we have MS Editor for all of that. What took me a long time was to do rigorous fact-checking. For example, real-world fact-checking. There were a lot of stories with murders and a lot of medical discrepancies. In fact, the murder victim would have sat up and protested. The medical discrepancies were such. But I had Dr. Shiv, Dr. Chitra on a phone call, on a WhatsApp message, and they would clear it up for me. Thanks for that. And Then there were timeline facts which went wrong. Somebody leaves for a hospital in the morning. Later, someone says, when did you get to the hospital? And she says, in the evening. Well, yeah, that can happen in Bangalore traffic. But to other readers, it may not work, right? So I had a very challenging fact-checking when it came to elements of science fiction, mystical elements like Rugmani's mystical story. Then there were deep psychosomatic responses which you can't find on Google. And like Siddharth's story, very strong ethnicity. Again, you can't get those facts on Google. So that was my very biggest challenge. And I will say that the first draft of the story which came to me was in black and white. An editor's job is to tinge it with the right hues so that it comes out in pleasant colors. And I hope I achieved that. One thing that I did do was to keep the long stories short, right? And I'm going to keep this long story short as well.
You said you
Well said.
destroyed a fly and a dog in the editing process. You can't say that no animals were hurt in the making of the
Well said. Nilanjan, you know, when I first read Nilanjan's story, I picked up the phone, called Kalyan, and said, this is not a story, this is an essay. Do we even allow him into the book? Okay, we were very cruel those back then. And what we did was we did the entire session with workshopping and traumatizing him and going through line by line. And what finally resulted in this exquisite piece of a father writing about the birth of his son. I mean, I can't even describe it, how much it brought tears into the eyes of its readers. That's what the session did for him, the process did for him. Nilanjan has worked in business development and marketing in the global technology industry. Today he's officially retired but spends his time traveling, history, archaeology, nature, photography, and editing stories of the other writers. My question is, what were they like? What were all our writers like before they came into our collective, and what are they like now that they've gone through the rigors of what we did to them? Tell us that story. And you just have 4 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So clearly it's a great story. Each writer has a story of, transformation, learning, collaboration, and I think take some examples. We have the mix from one end of the spectrum to the other. So we just heard from Murali talking about, the first workshop that he conducted for some other one of our writers. But I was surprised to hear from him that, and I didn't know this actually, that he says, and he's one of our very experienced writers, that he undertook a serious change of his story after his workshop. I mean, two reviewers who did his workshop. So that's one end of the spectrum. So transformation there, for example. Sheila is over here. She was telling me that she's been writing for 25 years. She's self-published. She has great. She conducts classes for kids for writing, creative thinking, etc. And so when she came into the collective, she had difficulty listening to so much of feedback, reviewing, critique, etc. But once that opened up her mind, she realized that there were things that were very, very valuable coming to her for her writing. We have also at the other end less experienced writers, people who have started and not continued, like Arpita somewhere here in the team, Meera, who actually never wrote. Shruti, I think you've been writing, but for the family and friends and yourself. So the various levels we had, and so there are people like Arpita who says that she was told to not be a fly on the wall and observe her story, but get in there and talk about the emotions of the character arcs need to be developed, deepened, etc. And I think perhaps Pratima said, kill the fly, don't kill the fly, kill the fly. So there have been these experiences all of us went through.
He actually said, swat
Swat the fly. So there's another story which I found very, very powerful, and I think a lot of the others have also told me. Just stick to Tom's story. Tom drew on a very personal experience to write his story, and in the process found release and closure, and something which happened many, many years ago over a long period of his life. And he talks about that. Interestingly, today he is clear in his mind, thanks to the process, to the writing, the refining, and the end product. Today is very clear in his mind. So this was a creative writing experience for all of us. But he is not going to write in the fictional space. He wants to be in non-fiction in general. And he says he can see his path and in writing. And his first project is to pick up the writings his father left behind. Basically reflections on our last journey everyone goes through. And he's working on bringing up that as a book. And a lot of my co-authors here have actually started working on their new projects. So there's a clear, I would not even call that a transformation. It's really, transitioning to the next step, which I think the collective has enabled.
We're finished now with time. Is this the first time something like this has happened? No. It's happened. Collectives have come together to write books together, to help other writers become better writers. But for us, it was an extraordinary experience. Will it happen again? It probably will. But I think musicians have collectives, dancers have collectives, theatre people have collectives, writers too need to have collectives, and that's why we're here to tell you our story. Thank you so much, and thank you for all our writers who drove in from Bangalore to be here. Just stand up wherever you are.